This is the port of Long Beach, California. It is the second largest port in North America ahead of the port of New York and behind the port of Los Angeles. Roughly 16 million tons of cargo pass through this port each year, which eventually makes its way to warehouses, factories, and homes within the United States. Now, this single port, which is just 13 square kilometers, is responsible for well over $100 billion worth of trade and employs over 340,000 people in Southern California. So it is quite apparent that this port is one of the most vital parts of Southern California's economy. Yet the Port of Long Beach is not owned by the city of Long Beach, nor is it owned by the state of California, and it's not even owned by the nation of the United States. You see, in the late 1980s, the Port of Long Beach was sold to a company called Orient Overseas International Limited, which is a company that is based out of Hong Kong. And at this time when the purchase was made, Hong Kong was a British colony and a close economic partner with the United States. So the United States viewed this sale as a win-win, as the Hong Kong-based company would go on to invest billions of dollars and expand the port on its own, while hundreds of thousands of jobs in Southern California would be created from this investment. And for roughly 3 decades, that's what happened. This was a fairly positive relationship between Long Beach, California, and the Hong Kong-based company. But then in 2017, something happened that put an end to this positive relationship. You see, in July of 2017, the Chinese state-run company called Costco ended up purchasing a 75% stake in the Orient Overseas International Limited company. Therefore, China became the new owner of the Hong Kong-based company and therefore technically the owner of the Port of Long Beach, California. Now, even though this probably didn't make the news because shipping is not exactly the most interesting topic to bring up in mainstream news, it was important enough for the federal government to take action. You see, a state-run Chinese company now owned the 3rd most important port in North America, meaning that the Chinese government had control over one of the key trading points and economic hubs of the United States. And for the United States government, that was completely unacceptable, citing national security risks. So that is why the federal government forced Costco to sell off the Port of Long Beach immediately to a non-Chinese state-run company. And in 2019, Australia's Macquarie Group ended up buying the port for $1.8 billion. So now technically the Port of Long Beach is owned by a private Australian company, which is viewed as a much safer owner in the eyes of the US government. Now, if this was just an isolated incident of China trying to buy up an important seaport, then it might be worth just ending the video right here. But this is just one of dozens of cases where Chinese state-run companies have tried buying out the most important ports in the world. For example, in Hambantota, Sri Lanka, there is a port that is in a strategic location just below one of China's rivals, which is India. So in 2017, China was able to buy out a controlling share in this port, largely because the government of Sri Lanka was in a lot of debt and needed foreign investment in order to save its economy. And there are other examples just like this. For example, in Australia in 2015 and 2016, Chinese investors bought out a controlling interest in Port Darwin and a large share of the Port of Melbourne. China also controls the port of Freeport in the Bahamas, which is just off the coast of the United States. And in fact, China and Chinese companies control ports in virtually every major country in the world, and in countries where they don't control any ports, they typically have around 49% ownership of at least some ports of the country. And some examples of this are some ports in Belgium, France, and even the United States. But here's what might be the most striking point of this video. This buying spree where China is buying up all of the ports all over the world has only really been occurring for the last 10 years, meaning that China went from having relatively no ownership of any ports before the year 2010 to becoming the largest owner of the world's ports today. So that brings up the question, why are they doing this, and what are the ramifications of China's plan? Well, let's start off with the first question. They are doing this because of something they have called the Belt and Road Initiative. Essentially, this was a plan announced by China in the early 2010s with the purpose of having a global development and investment strategy. President Xi Jinping was quoted as saying that the initiative is a bid to enhance regional connectivity and embrace a brighter future. So he was pretty much implying that the entire purpose of this initiative was to build friendlier relationships with foreign countries while helping grow China's economy. but others have called it China's plan for world domination with a China-centered global trading network. In fact, the plan was nicknamed by some as the One Belt, One Road initiative, essentially implying that China wants to monopolize the world's trading network. And well, that strategy to monopolize the trading network of the world seems to be more in line with one very specific trade route that China has almost certainly been trying its best to monopolize. And that trade route is called the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road. If you were to take a look at a map, you would see that the most efficient trade route between China, Africa, and Europe is one where you start off the coast of China, then travel through the port of Singapore, which China bought in 2015, then you would travel past Port Hambantota in Sri Lanka, which I already mentioned is owned by China, then you would travel along the east coast of Africa and the southern tip of Yemen. And in Yemen, China has invested $508 million into ports in Mocha and Aden, and in East Africa, China is a heavy investor in the ports of Djibouti and Sudan. But after passing by Yemen and East Africa, you would have to go through the Suez Canal, which I had recently just made a video about, and you can check out on my channel. But nonetheless, China has agreed to invest $5 billion within the Suez Economic Zone, which is essentially the Suez Canal. Then lastly, to get to Europe, you would have the option of either stopping at the port of Freeport in Turkey, which China is of course an investor in, or you could go through the waterways of Istanbul, which China is heavily invested in as well. But there is also another option where you could end your journey at what is known as the Pearl of the Mediterranean, also known as the distribution hub of Europe, called the Port of Piraeus in Greece. Now, I do have a whole video coming out on the Port of Piraeus in Greece, which you should subscribe and hit the notification bell to see, as that video will be coming out in the next few days. But all you have to know for this video is that China was able to buy out the Port of Piraeus, even though many Western powers had the opportunity to do so beforehand. So, COSCO, the Chinese shipping company, now owns one of the largest trading hubs in Europe, and also now is an owner of all of the major ports that connect China to Europe, East Africa, and Western Asia. Essentially, China has nearly monopolized an entire trade route within the last 10 years. And its plans to own the world's trade routes don't just stop there. For example, I made a video on Canada's Northwest Passage and how it will likely become the most important trade route in the world by 2050, and China has already laid the groundwork for potentially investing in the Arctic region by publishing a lengthy essay on the importance of investing in the Northwest Passage in Canada, and they've also bought out their first Canadian port in Nova Scotia, while also sending many ships through the Northwest Passage within the last decade. And if that wasn't enough, China has invested even more money into the Northeast Sea Route in Russia, and have even invested in Greenland. And by the way, one shocking statistic I was able to find was that these Chinese investments in Greenland represent up to 12% of Greenland's GDP. Now, I could go on and on about all of the other trade routes that China is trying to monopolize, but the main takeaway that you should take here is that no trade route is safe from Chinese ownership. But then that brings up the question: what are the ramifications of all of this? Well, let's dig into it and start off with this fact. Even though China has invested in many ports around the world, that does not mean that they own it in perpetuity. So for example, in the majority of these investments, the ports that they are invested in are actually leased for the duration of between usually 30 years and 99 years, meaning that the original owner of the port will eventually take back some control from China unless a new deal is renegotiated beforehand. Another point is that all of these countries are legally allowed to kick out Chinese companies if they feel it is a threat to national security. I mean, the US has already done this. And if other countries feel the need to stop China's trade domination, then they are more than welcome to do so and force them to sell off ownership in the ports. But for China, by having control over so many important trade hubs, they're quietly becoming the new trading empire of the world. Essentially, they're taking fees and thereby growing their own economy with every ship that passes through their ports. Meaning that as all other countries on the planet grow and become more connected through trade, the real secret winner here is actually COSCO and China. Now, another ramification is obviously the influence of Chinese companies, which will likely become more and more apparent as time goes on. I mean, sure, China is able to control the ports in many countries, and potentially decide which countries and companies can use the ports and which cannot. But what might be a more important point is that they are also able to control the areas around these ports. So they're able to bring over other Chinese companies into foreign countries and further increase the Chinese influence in the area, which of course many countries like the US don't really like right now. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, is that shipping and trade is a very unique industry that works closely with the manufacturing industry, the shipping industry, and the government. And one of the fears that is mounting is that China is gaining political influence throughout the world. And some are growing nervous that the tensions between the Eastern and Western powers may climb as China continues to increase its influence. But the same could also be said the other way, because it is possible that Chinese expansion into Western countries might make China more open to Western ideas, which would potentially lesser the tensions between the world superpowers. But nonetheless, even though most governments around the world have the option of stopping Chinese investments into their own ports, the results so far as a whole have been relatively positive for most of the countries that China has invested in, as most of these investments have actually expanded their ports, hired more people, and the economies of these countries have experienced a tangible boost since taking on Chinese investments. But at the end of the day, the only country that China is still dependent upon in order to fully monopolize the trading network of the world is actually a fairly small country, a country that actually ships the largest quantity of the world's resources and right now controls the world's shipping industry. Yet no one really talks about them. So if China wants to conquer the shipping industry, they must first compete with a few dozen Greek businessmen known as the Golden Greeks. But that will be the story for my next video. So make sure to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell if you want to see my next video when it comes out. And also please hit that like button, as that would mean the world to me. But I want to leave you with this question. What do you think of China's Belt and Road Initiative? And what do you think of them buying out the world's ports? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Anyways, please click on my documentaries playlist or my next video, and I will see you guys there in just a few seconds.